Hi, I'm Patty Marty with Babylock, and in this video, I'm going to walk you through a quick and simple tutorial on how to make a serged wine bag. Now, this is the project we're going to be working on, and this project only requires a 4-thread overlock stitch. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to set our machine up for a 4-thread overlock. So you can see here that I'm working on our Babylock Triumph, which is an 8-thread combination serger. So what that means is this is a cover and chain stitch side, as well as a 4-thread overlock side. So for this, I'm just going to pull up my quick reference threading guide that comes with my Triumph serger and follow the easy steps on the guide to set the machine up for a 4-thread overlock. Now I have 4 cones of arrow lock thread, so you can use some coordinating thread for your project. Now, as far as stitch settings on this, I do have my stitch length set at 3, and I have my stitch width set at the widest setting. And that's all you need to do to get your machine ready to go. For the project, we do have instructions that are written for this project, and these are available on babylock.com. So you can go out to babylock.com and search for the Simple Serged Wine Gift Bag and download these instructions to help you along the way as you're creating this fun little gift project. For the project, you're going to need just some simple fabric and stabilizer to get started. You're also going to want a little bit of ribbon to help create the tie for the gift bag. So this is actually just 2 pieces of coordinating fabric, and you can choose whatever you want to use. It's a great scrap buster project because all you need is a 13-inch wide by 18-inch tall piece of fabric. Now, these are actually fused. I used some stabilizer. I used the Babylock Fabric Fuse Stabilizer, which is just a thin stabilizer that can fuse to the back of your fabric. And I like that just because it gives it just enough body to kind of give it some structure once the wine bag is put together. You could also use something like the Babylock Ultra Soft Fusible, which is a really thin, lightweight, more of like a flannel batting that would also be a great way to add some body to your fabric. So I have these 2 pieces of fabric cut. I have the stabilizer fused to the back, and really I'm ready to start stitching. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take this is going to be my main fabric, this is going to be my front fabric, and this is my lining fabric. And I'm going to line them up right sides together. And we're going to first serge along the 13-inch edge of the fabric. Now, one thing I do want to mention to you, and just something to keep in mind, especially as we show you some other options of some things you can do, or if your fabric has direction, you want to pay attention to what is the top of the bag. So in this case, my fabric does have a direction on the outside. So I want to make sure that as I'm lining up my fabric, this is the top of my fabric, or this is the direction I want my fabric to go in. So I'm going to make sure that I serge along that top edge, okay? It's going to end up becoming part of the cuff when you actually turn it inside out. But just kind of keep that in mind as you're adding embroidery or maybe doing some piecing or something like that to make your project bag. So I've got those 2 fabrics together. And again, my machine is set up. I just have my standard presser foot on. If needed, you could use some little wonder clips that are great to help kind of hold your fabrics together. And then we're going to serge off along the edge here with our 4-thread overlock. Okay, so there I've just seamed along the edge. Now, this is a very forgiving project, so don't be too hung up on if your seams don't perfectly align, because we've got our knife blade as well to help us to kind of trim any excess fabric. At this point, what we want to do is take this fabric now and open it up, and then we're going to create a tube. Okay, so we're going to take our right sides together, start off with my center and kind of fold those together. And this is where you're really going to need your little wonder clips. Clip this together here. Okay, just to kind of get our center seamed. And we can kind of fuss with that a little bit as we get everything together. And then we do also want to add a ribbon to help us to kind of tie that wine bag closed so that it will hold the wine bottle in the gift bag, and also just gives it a nice little decorative element. So for that, we're going to want to use about a yard of ribbon, okay, roughly a yard of ribbon. And for this, I'm just using a really thin satin ribbon, okay, and you're going to fold that in half. Okay, so I'm folding it in half, and I'm taking that folded edge, and I'm going to place this in between my outside fabric for my wine bottle. I'm going to place it there, and I just left the fold extend a little bit just so that I knew where that was as I'm approaching it from a serging standpoint. Then take the excess ribbon, kind of lay that in the tube that we're creating, okay? We want to make sure that we're not catching that ribbon, the long pieces of the ribbon, as we're serging. But we do want to make sure that we catch the ribbon in the side seam as we're creating our tube. And when we serge, we're going to start on the exterior side of the bag. Okay, we're going to start with that fabric and then work our way into the lining. Now, one thing you have to remember, and this is the part that I struggled with, is we want to leave an opening here, right? We want to leave a little bit, like maybe a 2 to 3 inch opening here so that we can turn our bag inside out. Okay, so we'll make sure that we stop and serge off and then serge back on. Okay, so again, I'm just kind of telling myself that so I don't forget that step as we are making the bag. Because if you were like me, I started making these and you can easily make multiples of them and you just start serging and kind of forget that step. So we're going to start at the end here. Again, no changes to my machine setting. Now I am going to just kind of stop here and make sure that I've got my ribbon there. So I'm going to actually trim off that fold. And that way I know that that seam is going to get caught in my seam. When you get here to the middle seam, just kind of make sure your things are lined up here. And then also just be careful because you're going over a thicker seam. Now I'm going to stitch down about 6 inches or so, and this is where I want to pause to give myself that 2 to 3 inch break so that I can turn things inside out. So my needles right now are out of the fabric. If not, you could rotate your hand wheel towards you so that your needles are out of the fabric. I'm going to raise my presser foot, move that kind of off to the left so that my fabric is no longer being fed into the underneath the foot, and then I'm just going to serge off. Okay, so this is going to give me an area down here that I'm going to start picking at my serging here so that I've got that opening. Now I can go back and kind of clean this all up once my seam is all together. All right, so now to pick back up, one of the things you're going to want to do, or a little tip for you, is to take the tail of the overlock threads, and if you kind of tug back on them, what that will do is it'll take those threads off the stitch finger. That's just going to make it be a little bit easier to get your fabric underneath the foot again and to begin serging. So I'm just going to find a spot, again, giving myself about 2 to 3 inches, and then just begin serging again. So I'm going to come back here and just give this a little trim just to kind of get that fabric out of the way. All right. So at some point in time, once we turn this inside out, we'll want to make sure we finish that edge, or if it's going to be in the inside of your bag, you might just leave it open and hope that your receiver of the gift doesn't study your project that much. All right. At this point, we have our tube. Now, this is the part where I think sometimes in the written instructions, it's hard to kind of grasp how this is supposed to be folded. But basically what we're going to do is we want to box out the corners of both the outside and the lining fabric. So to do that, what we're first going to do is take our fabric and kind of reposition the fold. Okay, so we're going to take that seam that we just stitched and we're going to kind of fold that so that it's centered. Okay, and then we're going to again use our little clips, clip this. Okay, you can trim up your serger threads or just cut them off as you're serging that seam. I'm going to do the same thing for the lining. So do the same thing for the lining. And I'm not too hung up on my seams right here aren't perfect because this is the inside of the bag. And this is a very, very forgiving project, okay? It's not one to be super, super fussy about. All right, so it doesn't matter which one you start with, but I'm going to go ahead and just, since I've got the lining fabric here, set this up. And again, we're just going to, still using the 4-thread overlock, just going to serge across the end of the bag for the lining fabric. And then flip to the other side of the long tube and do this. Now, I will say, I don't know if you guys can see here or not, but there's my ribbon. So you want to be aware of where your ribbon pieces are so that when you're making seams, those don't get cut. Okay, so it's probably a good idea to give that a little check. And then again, we can just serge off the edge here. So again, this is the outside of my bag, and then this end is the lining bag. Now what we want to do is we want to make this so that we can box the corners out. And what that's going to allow you to do is have your bag lay flat. Okay, so it's going to give it a flat surface for when you put the wine bottle in. So here you can kind of see this is one that I stitched earlier. This is what we're creating. We're creating these little boxed corners. So to do that, what we're going to do, and I'll start with the lining first, is here's my fabric, right? There's my little center seam here. So I'm going to take that, and again, I'm going to kind of open it up and line this up so that it creates a point. Okay, this is what's going to give us our boxed out corner. Now you could also take a ruler, measure about 1 inch, and then draw a line there to give yourself a guide to cut on. But I'm actually just going to kind of reference one of the lines on my knife cover as my reference point for my boxing out of corners. So there's one, then I'm going to come over to the other side. Again, kind of center that. And then I just put a little clip there just to kind of hold that in place. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to serge across here so that we're cutting off approximately 1 inch to give ourselves that boxed out corner. Again, very forgiving project. If you make it a little bit wider, it just means you can fit a bigger bottle in there. Okay. So we're going to now line this up. Now what I did is I actually tried to line the point there with this last line on the knife cover. Okay, that was just my kind of eyeball. But again, you could mark this and then just serge off, cutting that corner fabric to box out the corner on one side, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Again, I'm just kind of lining my tip up with that line. Okay, so I have those two now trimmed out, and then again, that's going to give me that flat bottom for my wine bag. So let's repeat that on the exterior of the bag. So just kind of fold that. And I'm kind of just feeling that stitched seam to make sure that it seems like it's at a right angle. All right. Okay, so again, I've boxed out the corners on the wine bag front, okay, on the exterior fabric. So at this point, what we want to do is just turn this inside out. So that's why we left this little opening here. So we're going to kind of take our fingers, or if you have a turning tool, and start to bring that fabric so it's turning it right sides out. another piece. It's a tight little tube, but give yourself a minute and you can kind of pull this all out. Now, you could trim these if they were bothering you before you turn this inside out. At this point, they're going to be buried in the inside of the project. So once you kind of get it all turned right sides out, I'll just kind of either take a turning tool or some kind of a purple thing or whatever you might have in your sewing room, or even just kind of use your fingers or scissors even, and just kind of press out those boxed corners. Now at this point, you could also take this over to the iron and give it a nice press, okay? I do have this opening here that I need to deal with. So to close the opening, you could either hand sew that or take it to your sewing machine and just give it a light stitch to close that up. Again, this is going to be on the inside of the wine bag, so you could also just kind of give it a nice press and leave it without any stitching at all. Most likely, it's never going to be a seam that you see again. Okay, so you choose how you want to finish that opening, but at this point, we're ready to put the lining fabric inside the exterior. So for this, I'm just going to kind of fold at the top, take that lining fabric, and again, kind of push that down into the wine bag. Now give yourself some time to kind of get those seams lined up, kind of get the boxed corners aligned with one another between the lining fabric and the outside fabric. Okay. Again, you could go give this a little press if you wanted to, but now we have our ribbon here in the back and we have this kind of cylinder tube. And what we're going to do now is take this and turn that so that we have that little decorative cuff. And this is where we get to see our lining fabric with the bag. So again, you could take this, press this, and then really your bag is ready to go. So at this point, all you would do is insert your wine bottle, right? You're going to have your tie here and just give it a little tie, and that's going to hold everything together and give you a really nice gift that you can give to your friends, or a clever way to store all of your wine bottles at home. But now you may notice that we've done some other versions here in the video, and I'm going to just kind of talk to you about how you can kind of take this up a notch and make it even a little bit more of a special project, again, using your Baby Lock sergers. So first off, you may notice that this looks a little different than the ribbon that I used in the sample. This cording, or the little ties, were actually created using the belt loop binder and a chain stitch. So the Baby Lock 8-thread sergers have an 1.5 inch belt loop binder as well as a 3/4 inch belt loop binder. And these are ones that you can use coordinating fabric and run them through to create your own ties. Okay, so maybe you want to have something that, again, is another complementary fabric to your project. You can create them using the belt loop binders. So that's kind of one way that you could use your serger to even enhance the project a little bit more. So next up is going to be this one here that's done with the blue. I used the Triumph. I used decorative thread in the chain looper and did a cover stitch wide and a cover stitch narrow. So these are just sewn. And for this project, I marked on the back side of my main fabric. In this case, I just used some black Essex. And then I stitched on that wrong side. That way, when I flipped the fabric over, I was able to see that decorative thread in my cover stitch. So it just makes a fun pattern, and it's a way to embellish your fabric. And I just used a solid lining instead of a print lining. So that's another great way to use your serger. You also could do something like the Creative cover chain stitch. And this was done on the Baby Lock Applaud. So this is actually using a wiper system where you put your decorative threads in the wiper system and then stitch on the outside of the fabric, so on the right side of the fabric. And with this, I just used some wavy lines and just stitched randomly on my fabric, taking advantage of that wiper system and being able to use some fun decorative threads. Lastly, you could also use your embroidery machine. So this is one where just took a solid piece of fabric, and on that 13 by 18 inch piece of exterior fabric, did some embroidery. Okay, so I just put Sip and Serge on here for fun. Now in the instructions, we give you kind of an idea of placement for this. I made mine probably a little too high, so I would maybe give yourselves maybe like 4 or 5 inches from the bottom of the fabric to be able to place your design so that it fits right on the front of the bottle. But again, just a really fun way to also enhance it or even personalize it if you're giving this away as a gift. So a fun way to do that as well. So I hope you found this video helpful and gave you some inspiration on how you could use your serger. For more projects like this, be sure to check out babylock.com.